You ready?
Ready.
Okay, cool. Hey everyone, it's Alex, and you're listening to the Everyday Stories podcast, a podcast about the everyday stories from the people you know and the people you don't know, here to help you learn a thing or two about life and the stories that define us. Today we're talking to Hannah Elston. Well, Hannah did not send me a bio when I emailed her, so I actually pulled a bio from her website and I was reading it. I made a few changes, but Hannah, who has been working in production since she was 21 as a writer and producer, starting out in live events, writing on-stage segments and video content for shows around the world. Hannah moved to producing television commercials, and after some time, she transitioned to producing and art directing social media content. She wrote a book called You Are My Sunshine about her personal journey of exploring the pain, heartache, and strength that comes from starting a new life after the loss of a loved one. Hannah also has a Substack called Sad Girl Writes a Book, which is how we met because I posted a Substack note asking if anyone wanted to be on this podcast, and Hannah was one of the people that reached out. So Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I wanted to get into a couple of things that you had sent me prior to us recording this podcast. And you mentioned that you have an unconventional life story. Could you explain what that means to you?
Yeah. So when I say unconventional, it's funny because my friends and my boyfriend always call me like a little bit dramatic sometimes. It's just because I tend to like almost like romanticize my life a little bit in order to make sense of it or like have meaning behind it when things happen. But basically, when I say unconventional, I mean more it just didn't happen the way I expected it to, basically.
Yeah.
And I think with, my mom passing away and things happening in my adolescence, you take for granted people that you really love, that they're going to be there forever. Or you take for granted health and your health and things that just naturally happen in your day to day that you don't really realize are so important until they're gone. And so I think that's why I use the word unconventional because everyone in my social circle at the time too didn't have anyone pass away in their life that they were really close to or a parental figure. So it felt very unconventional to me, even though unfortunately I know that a lot of other people deal with losing a parent in their life early on. So,
yeah. And could you explain to people who don't know your story, sort of what has happened over the past like decade, 20 years or so?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, my mom passed away in 2020, so a couple months after the pandemic started, actually. But she had been sick at the time for 7 years with ALS. And if people don't know what ALS is, or Lou Gehrig's disease, it's basically like a neurological, they consider it like an autoimmune disease, but basically your body's attacking itself and you slowly develop paralysis in your body. So when I was 16, my mom started to develop paralysis in her feet and in her legs. And she started like tripping and falling a lot. And my family had no idea what was happening to her. She thought she might have had like a back problem or something. But then she started walking with a cane, and it developed very quickly after that. So my whole like late teens to like early 20s, I dealt with my mom progressing very quickly into like losing her ability to breathe and having to live in the hospital for like 4 years at a time, and then like being fed through a tube and things like that. Really, really awful for her, especially, obviously. So that's kind of the context. And then she passed away when I was 23, and I'm almost 29 now. So it's been a little while, but through that whole experience, it really changed my life. Like I haven't been the same since, obviously. So that's kind of like the context to what I'm referring to, basically.
Yeah. And how has it changed your life?
I honestly think it's just changed the perspective of my life. And the gratitude that I have for my life. My mom got so sick pretty quickly, to be honest, with something that we had never even heard of in our family at all. And she was just unable to even breathe on her own or like eat. She like lost her ability to like speak. So with ALS, your muscles of all your body slowly are paralyzed, including, your vocal cords, because they're muscles. And so she was like unable to speak anymore. And I just realized as such like a young kid in my like late teens, like how important it was to be so grateful for even like the mundane things that we take for granted in our lives, because my mom wasn't able to do any of that for forever until she passed away. So I just, it really changed my perspective. I see the world so much differently now. And like, honestly, nothing seems like that big of a deal to me anymore after going.
And what, when your mother passed, what were some of the challenges that you faced with your grief and the journey of that?
Yeah. You know, grief's a really big emotion, and people say grief, but it involves so many other emotions lying under the surface. It could be sadness, it could be confusion, it could be anger. And it was all these feelings accumulating at once, and I was so overwhelmed. And unfortunately, at the time, I didn't really have anyone in my family to like guide me through that process or to help me process it at all throughout the 7 years of my mother passing away slowly, and also after she passed away, because none of them had really ever lost like a mother in their life before later on in life, like it would traditionally be. And honestly, the overwhelming grief of not knowing if I'll ever be okay and if I'll ever be really happy again after dealing with something so devastating, I think was the hardest part of my grief for sure.
And what do you think would have been helpful during that time for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I feel even just like talking about emotions, you know, I actually put myself in therapy at the time when I was about 20, because I just was very lost and didn't really have someone to turn to that was older than me. Obviously, I have great best friends, but they're like my age, so they don't really know what's going on. You're like 19 and 19, and you're like, I don't know what to do about that, right? So I took myself to therapy, but I think that having parental figures or even just people in your life that have that level of emotional understanding when they talk about emotions, or a level of like emotional intelligence, educating yourself on what anxiety looks like, or what healthy anger looks like, and that it's okay to express it, or how to deal with confusing feelings, and you know, ground yourself, and having those tools and those resources to do so are super important. And unfortunately, the people in my life didn't have them either for themselves or for me. And that was something that I feel like one of the reasons why I wrote my book too, was to have that kind of resource for people to look to when they do lose someone that they love, maybe earlier in life or just in general, because there was no like resource for me to like go to like have a little bit of guidance, know that I'm going to be fine, because no one could tell me that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And to your book, why did you decide to write it and publish it?
Yeah. I mean, it's so many complex layers, and I feel like every year that passes by, I think of like a new reason why I wrote it, because there's so many. But the main ones, I think, initially in dealing with my grief, I really was worried I was gonna like forget the memories of my mom. There was like a deep sense of like anxiety that as the years went on, I would like slowly forget her, or I would like slowly forget what she looked like or what she said to me or things like that, outside of like physical things that I kept, like cards and pictures. And I you know, I initially wrote it because I didn't want to forget anything. I didn't want to forget anything of the journey. I didn't want to forget any appreciation or recognition of my mom and how strong she was in her journey. And I wanted to have that physical thing that I could like hold with me, and when I felt like I was missing her, I could turn to it and remember her again. Almost like a testament to her life, and also my journey with her. But I also wrote it, like I said, because I didn't have anything like that. There are obviously memoirs and like books that are like more self-help focused on grief, and I think those are great depending on your situation, but I think it's a lot more difficult to write a book that's personally about your own grief and then how you've learned it, instead of speaking in a more like psychological way. And the combination of the two can be really great for people to have to choose, and then choose that resource if they need it.
And how has your evolution between why you wanted to initially start writing this book versus how you view it now? Because I know that you mentioned that that's kind of changed every year for you.
It really has. Like, initially it was out of fear, and now I look back and I think that I didn't realize at the time how important creating art was to me. It was almost like an unconscious thing. I just have this like need to take painful things in my life and create art with it, like alchemist kind of vibes, you know. And I think that was one of the reasons why I probably wrote it as well, because as I read through, I see like the way that I created it, and you know, like I have like poetry in the book too and things like that depending on what the chapters are about. And I realized that expressing myself through art is like really important, and it's such like a deep part of my identity. And it was so freeing. So I didn't even realize that it would like free me of like the very negative emotions that experience gave me, and instead allow me to appreciate it in a more peaceful way. And I think that's the main thing I realized, honestly, probably in the last like 6 months. So it's been like
Wow.
almost 2 years since I like published it. Yeah.
Wow. And for you during your healing process, what were some of the key lessons that you learned?
In my healing process, I mean, I'm still healing. I think healing
Yeah.
might be forever. I say this in my book, but I just say this to everyone, that like grief is not about like accepting the circumstance and accepting the person that's gone, but more just making more space in your heart and making peace with it. So I've just like made peace with the fact that my mom isn't on earth with me anymore, but she's still very much a part of my life. And I think that accepting like all the parts of who I am. I've worked on this a lot in like therapy over the past almost 10 years, but accepting the parts where I am maybe still a little bit angry that she's not here anymore, or the parts and the emotions of me that are still really sad, or that I'm allowed to be happy even though she's not alive anymore. And you know, you can still have a really fulfilling life even though you never pictured living a life without that person. Because I feel like some people, when they deal with grief, they think that they are not allowed to be happy anymore, or they're not allowed to have peace or have joy or like laugh, like a belly laugh like they used to, because they think that their life is, it can't be the same, but your life can just be different but still appreciate those things and appreciate all the parts of you. And I think that's been the biggest like lesson of my grief so far, is like allowing myself to.
It's what you said beforehand about how grief for you was, or you writing your book was out of a place of fear of not remembering like what your mom looked like or the memories that you had with her. It, that was just like an emotion. I mean, I've never really experienced a profound loss in that way, but it's such an interesting perspective that it wasn't necessarily just about the loss for you. It was about, oh my gosh, am I going to like forget her as time goes on? But I think at the end of the day is like your mom will always live with you, like in your heart, and the memories will always be there. You may not even need like a physical book for it, but obviously I think it helped you during your whole like grief process as well. But I love your like perspective about this, and I think it's really important because grief can be really scary to talk about. And I recently had a conversation with a hospice chaplain, who, I don't know if you know what like a hospice chaplain is,
I
but
do, yes.
okay, cool. But for those who have not listened to the episode or just don't know what a hospice chaplain is, if you work in hospice care, it's essentially a team put together of like doctors, nurses. You have the chaplain that helps a person through their dying journey, dying process was what this person described it as, because they're seen as like terminally ill, that they're going to die within a couple months. So they just put a team together to help ease that process. And the chaplain and I, we were talking about just like death in general, how scary it is to talk about death and the fear of dying and everything like that. So I think having these conversations about quote unquote taboo topics, because it's scary to talk about death, it's scary to talk about grief, and just being like very open and transparent about it, I think is really powerful and can resonate with a lot of people, whether it's like now, whether it's in the future. The conversations are so important to happen. So I'm so glad that you are here on this podcast and we're talking about your story, because I think like everyone at some point in their life will be able to resonate with it.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you as well, for those who are currently in that grief process, what advice do you have for them?
I would say my advice, it's so complex because the feelings are so heavy sometimes, and your mind can be in a little bit of a state where you're almost like dissociating and just trying to survive. But I think that an encouraging word that I would have really loved to hear during my grief process is that, you'll get out of it. It's recovery is like a very long process. If you think about people who like break a bone and like their recovery is months, could be weeks, we don't know. And you might not know how long your recovery process is, but just like mental health and healing emotions and recovering from very deep emotions, it will move forward and you will recover. You may not be the same person that you were before, but sometimes that's okay because that's part of life, right? You don't have to be this. It's almost like a lack of growth in your life actually deters you from moving forward to where you need to go. So staying in the same spot actually sometimes, although you might not want to move on, it's almost, I talk about this like a little bit in my book, but basically I speak about how even when we don't want to move forward with our recovery, it happens to us, especially when it comes to death and to grief, because we don't have control over that choice. So we're confronted with the first step in our recovery, but you'll get there and you'll be okay. And, I myself almost 5 years ago would be so at peace knowing where I am now from where I was then.
Yeah. And I wanted to get into the mental health challenges and aspect of that too. In terms of, at least this is just like my perspective reading on it, is that with grief, it obviously it will always stay with you and it will come and go, but there is like, I feel like there's almost like this drop on you and then slowly you're able to repair the parts of yourself. But sometimes for people that are facing mental health challenges, so like anxiety and depression, yes, that's also something that lives with you for forever. But when you're going through it almost like can ebb and flow, and would love to hear like your advice to people who not necessarily like facing grief right now, but just like mental health challenges in general. Of does it, when you mention like it will get better at some point, when people are almost going through those challenges, they think, well, how do I know that? Like, there doesn't seem, I feel like I'm walking down this dark tunnel and there's no light. What do you tell people?
Yeah. I'd also like to say too, before I start on my advice, that grief is not, we all experience grief in different forms and layers in life. It's not just when we lose someone through death. It's also through breakups and grieving that relationship. It's also through losing a job that we really loved, or maybe it's moving. It could be, changing families, your parents' divorce. There's so many different types of grief. So I think we all do go through it. And in those moments, grief, if we don't have the resources and the people in our life to support us or to how to support ourselves, we tend to fall into mental health crisis or moments of struggle with our mental health, right? And so for me, speaking with me, when I was about 18, 19, up until I was about 20 or 21, I had pretty severe depression. And I struggled with anxiety like my whole life, but obviously it got quite intense during that time. And I understand like the haze. You feel like there's just like a cloud on you. It feels very burdensome and like heavy. And I think that, when you want to give advice to someone then, as someone now who's not struggling with depression anymore, thankfully, telling them that it's going to be okay, they, like, for me, if someone told me that, I'd be like, when?
What do you mean? Yes, you're like, when is it getting better?
Time and day, because I'd like to be over this right now. So I wouldn't say that would be my advice. I would more tell people that they're not alone in feeling that, because my depression had a lot to do with me feeling very alone because nobody else in my life understood me. Nobody else understood my place. So I think that when a part of loneliness that I've experienced in my personal perspective is not always feeling physically alone. It's more feeling alone and people misunderstanding you or not understanding you for who you are and where you are in that time of your life. And I think that's where a lot of my mental health crisis came from. So I think even finding one person to express how you're feeling and for them to have the compassion and empathy to try and understand and be there for you, even if it's just holding you when you cry, I think is so important. And I think that would be my advice to people who are dealing with that right now, is finding someone, whether it's a therapist, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's not, maybe it's a support group or a group of people that have a similar hobby to you, and finding someone to speak about it with you and to understand you will hopefully with time, and obviously speaking to a doctor if you need to, but hopefully with time make you feel more understood and slowly move forward.
Yeah. I can relate a little bit. I also struggle with like anxiety, depression, like very young, growing up in like my teens. And it I I don't think I've ever really tried. I kind of like pushed it away, honestly, like pushed it down. I like, yes, I processed it in ways that I tried to, but what you just said, I was like, it makes so much sense. Because I think at the time I just felt like really alone. I was like, nobody understands me, nobody gets what I'm going through. Also too, when you're a teenager and you're just figuring yourself out, like the hormones are raging, you don't know what's left, what's right. So you hearing that, it honestly like put into perspective for me personally, like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And I think for anyone else out there as well who has struggled with anxiety, depression, mental health challenges, sometimes you can feel like you're on an island and no one is with you. But what's funny is that we're all on these little islands, but we're all part of the same, we're all in the same place. And I also realized over time too is that there are no original thoughts. So if you think you're alone, you're not alone, because everyone is thinking the same thing. Everyone's going through the same struggles. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because yes, I think it's a great point of like just putting that into perspective of you are not alone. Like there are people here, there's a community here. No matter what, you will find someone.
You just need to find them.
Yes.
You have to put yourself out there and find them, and they will come to you. I always believe that when I think about, when I look back at my life and like how it used to be, and I was able to find people that understood me, you know, like with time, you know, my current boyfriend, he just like came into my life. There was like no reasoning for it. You know, I don't know why my grandparents were chosen for me, but I get it because they were there for me during that time, and my best friends. There's just people that come into your life. You just have to find them. And I think patience is really important too, in understanding this kind of finding the people for you and finding the support for you, because you also need to be patient with yourself. Things aren't going to solve right away, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to find a solution or find a space where you feel understood. And people like it to happen really quickly, and I'm that kind of person. I would love all my problems to be solved immediately.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's just not how life rolls, including emotional support as well as everything else. And giving yourself a little bit of grace and patience through the process. If you have a bad day and you wake up and you feel like shit or you feel depressed, that day, that's the day. But tomorrow's a different day, and let's see how we feel tomorrow. Maybe there's one good thing that'll happen the next day, and it could feel a little bit better. You don't know unless you try.
Yeah.
You know?
And what do you hope people can get out of hearing your story as someone who has lost a loved one to ALS?
I think it's so many things. I think the emotional understanding of it, it's almost, how do I explain this? It's a little bit like, I feel that through my expression of my story, people are able to understand that unfortunately we'll all go through grief in life, whether that's losing someone or whatever else happens in our life, and you can't run away from it. That's why I think it's a very scary topic to talk about, because people know they can't run away from it. So we like to run away from really big emotions, but we can't run away from grief. If we love people so deeply, and that's like the main part of our existence, is to find the people that we love and care for deeply and create a great life with each other, then we're going to feel grief when they pass away our lives, and here are not forever, you know? Yeah. And we can't run away from it. So with my expression of my story, I hope that people will understand that it's okay to have a level of preparation in understanding it and speaking about it and not being scared about it, and knowing that being vulnerable is not something to be embarrassed about. It's through strength to be vulnerable, and that creating a support group around you and finding resources that work for you, whether that be like journaling or therapy or whatever it is so important, because unfortunately we all will experience it and be confronted with it, or have already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something else that you had mentioned to me prior to this recording is that you said the sunshine is always behind the clouds.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, how do you maintain a positive outlook on life even after experiencing such a profound loss?
Yeah. I think it's rooted in like hope. I think that's the main emotion, and like obviously gratefulness for sure when it comes to like the day to day. But I think that there's just, my mom raised me with like a lot of like hope in my life. Like she always believed in me, no matter what I did. If it was getting an A+ on a test or going into university or whatever it was, she always really believed in me. And I think that really instilled a deep sense of hope in knowing that even when things look like they're going wrong, I believe that the end solution, or the end to whatever this little chapter in my big story is, things will work out the way that it needs to.
Yeah.
And I think that is the main way of maintaining that sense of positivity in your life, and appreciating things, seeing that life, if it was all sunshine and rainbows all the time, I actually think it would be quite boring, if I'm being honest. We love a little, if we watch like a movie, like a big like blockbuster hit, like no way is it going to be like they start the movie smiling and like they smile the whole way through, like,
You need a little conflict.
a little bit, a little drama, a little conflict. That's just life, and when you choose to accept that, I think that life feels more like you're flowing through it rather than like fighting against it.
I like that. The flowing through rather than fighting.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you like remember your mom in your life, in like your current life?
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because when I told you that I was really scared about forgetting about her, I think about my mom every single day.
Yeah.
I have never once forgotten about her. She is half my genes. She birthed me. She's who, like, we are the same, So I've never for an instant, like, ever not thought of her or forgot about her. And it honestly just depends how I feel. I listen to my intuition and I do what I need to do, whether that be I've saved all of the letters she ever gave me and all the cards she gave me. And when I'm having a bad day or someone was hard on me or wasn't nice to me, I read them and they remind me of who I am and where I've come from, and the woman that raised me. And I think that that's really impactful for me in my life. I listen to songs that we used to listen to when I was kids. Talking about her with people I love is so important. And thankfully, a lot of people in my life did meet her before she passed away. So they're able to also remind me of things that make me laugh or make me smile. And I think keeping that memory alive is really important, outside of just what you think, but also other people as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I never met your mom. I don't know your mom. But I think from everything that you just explained, and also just being able to talk to you and like hearing your story and how eloquently you speak, that a lot of who you are has been learned through your mom. So I know that she was a fabulous person, that she went through life so gracefully as you are too, and that you are kind of like a living, breathing memory of her. I also wanted to ask you one last question that I have been asking all my other podcast guests as well, is what have you learned over the past year that you're going to take into your new year of life?
That's a really great question. Let me think about that for a second. I mean, even in just my late 20s, I feel that with time I've had like a lot of time to reflect, because a lot has happened in my 20s, right? My mom was really sick in my early 20s. She passed away in around my mid 20s, moving out, starting a career, all these things. And I think the main lesson that I learned was that I can trust myself. And that I don't have to explain why all the time. When I trust who I am or my intuition or my decisions or what I feel comfortable with or don't, that I can trust myself in where I want to go or what I want to do. And, I think that that's been like the biggest lesson that I've learned in my entire 20s, and one that I'll carry on. Honestly, the most I cognitively understood this last year, but I realized I've been learning it slowly, and then I'll definitely carry on probably for the rest of my life because trusting myself changed my life.
Yeah. Wow. That was a great answer. Thank you so much, Hannah, for hopping on the podcast. It was so lovely to speak with you and really just like delve into grief and loss and how we can come out the other side. So I really appreciate our conversation. And I love to end every episode with a quote. And I was like sifting through a handful of quotes, but I think this one speaks to the most. And now that I'm looking at it, I think I literally just did a podcast recording with someone where I read off a quote by the same author of that quote. I think I gotta like look back in the edit and see. But the quote is, grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part of your chest. And that's from Jamie Anderson.
100% agree.
Yeah. Grief is totally like all about love at the end of the day.
Really is. Without love, there's no grief. And without grief, there's no remembrance of love. And I 100% agree, and there's nothing wrong with it.
I know. It makes me think, I can't believe we're ending the episode like this, but it makes me think about my ex when we were like breaking up. She said to me, because I was like sad, crying, I'm a mess. But what she said to me, like, the reason why you're feeling all these emotions is because like, and also for her as well, is just knowing that there was so much love that we were giving to one another, that all of that grief was like truly like that built up of, oh my gosh, like this is all the love that we were giving at the time. So that's what that quote also makes me think about too just now.
Yeah, it's a juxtaposition of emotions and feelings. You have to have both in order to experience life.
Totally. Well, thank you again, Hannah, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for everyone else that was tuning in. And we'll see you in the next episode. All right. I will